Welcome to Everything with Everett. This is a talk show podcast hosted by Everett McConaughey. The purpose of this production is to share thoughts, voices, and information to further a discussion on who we are as individuals, communities, and a global society. Everything with Everett is open to all topics of discussion: faith, science, history, finances, social issues, and, well, everything. Be sure to follow, like, and subscribe. Visit everettpodcast.com for all the details.
Does it feel like we're paying a lot for everything? Remember when you used to be able to get eggs for less than $2? Like now, $2.67 feels like a deal, and then a week later, they're now $3.77 a dozen. Granted, there are things like bird flu and whatnot, but it feels like the perpetual pot of boiling hot water is gradually being increased, and we, the frogs, are just dealing and adapting with these increasing norms that are actually historically price gouging, coming from the whole pandemic situation, as well as the supply chain coming to a halt during the pandemic. Is honestly, I feel like, taught all of us that the system really is a fragile ecosystem, just like global warming. And once the scale is tipped too far in one direction, it's really hard to undo that tip. And if you're able to get it to go backwards or stabilize, it's really almost impossible to get back to what was. So as we all continue to deal with the decreasing cash in our pocketbooks, and inflation is still high, the Fed's just lowered the national interest rate by 0.5%, half a percentage point, which should be good, but it's still, they're estimating it's going to take 2 or 3 years with gradual decreases to get everything back, from an inflation standpoint, back to the buying power that we had, pre-2020, back in 2019, 18, all that jazz. So price gouging and inflation are very different things. And this podcast episode is going to be about that. I have commandeered my trusty resource over at ChatGPT to help write this out. So that is where the words are crafted from. But I also have discussed this with some people, and also, have my own thoughts on these things. But moreover, I'm not trying to claim that I'm an expert on anything. I'm not, someone who's going to be able to give you like groundbreaking financial advice. I know what works for me. I know what makes sense to me. And truthfully, this entire podcast is about giving you enough of something to inspire your desire to educate yourself. You should always be a lifelong learner. The minute that you stop learning is the minute that you're dead and no longer relevant in this living world. A mentor once said, "The second that you think you know it all is the moment you lose the game." And that's true with life, I feel like. So one of the campaign talking points of Kamala Harris has been related to this whole price gouging situation. And looking at her website brings, some really solid facts about this. 37 out of the 50 states in our country have price gouging laws saying that, companies cannot inflate the cost of water during a hurricane or cannot take advantage of the supply and demand situation following a natural disaster or calamity. And in many ways, even though the official proper pandemic is over, we're still living in the wake of this. We're still living in an era where 37 states are not fully enforcing the laws on their own books to protect their citizens, their constituents. And these companies need to be told, you only get to charge what the commodity's worth. But instead, they're making all these record profits. We see, with McDonald's being like, oh, I guess we'll, give you a $5 meal deal. And then, oh, it's so popular, I guess we're going to have to extend it out to the end of the year. You used to be able to go get a cheeseburger for $1. Now it's like several dollars for the same piece of crap, slopped together, no F's given burger. And they're making record profits going, well, no one wants to come to us anymore. How can we get more money? Like, duh. People come to bargain situations. America loves a good deal, and we don't make a lot of money. So we want the most bang for our buck. And when that same item that we used to get in the 90s for $1 now costs $6, it's cheaper to go to the grocery store and make it ourselves at home, and you can have 6 of them for the same price as one from the fast food place. So Kamala Harris has made a point on her platform that she is, if she wins the election as president, she will call on the 37 states that already have these laws, and then also push to have it nationally federally codified, that companies cannot pay back their CEOs, cannot buy back stocks, cannot pay high dividends. When you, the grocery shopper, the consumer, are the ones footing that bill. It's not right. It's not moral, and it's not the American way. So I asked ChatGPT to describe the difference between inflation and price gouging, and how does each impact the perceived reality of both the economy as a whole and an individual basis. And I read through the prompt response that it gave earlier today, and I feel like I learned a few things, because we're in really weird times. Things that it feels like are happening are kind of classic inflation, and then other things don't feel like they're technically, by the old definition, price gouging, but in reality they are. We're just drawing out the problem that is justifying this. So, without further ado, here is the middle of the road analysis between inflation and price gouging. Inflation and price gouging both involve rising prices, but they are distinct phenomena with different causes, mechanisms, and impacts on the economy and individuals. Inflation is the general increase in the prices of goods and services across an entire economy over time. It's often measured by indexes like the Consumer Price Index, CPI. Inflation can be caused by several factors, including demand pull inflation, when the demand for goods and services exceeds the supply, that's supply and demand. Cost push inflation, when the cost of production rises, example, higher wages, raw material costs. This leads to higher prices for the consumers. So if it costs more to make the goods, or it costs more to get the materials to build those goods, that can be a reason why costs go up. And that's part of inflation. A monetary inflation, when the money supply increases faster than the economic output, diminishing the purchasing power of the money. And all three of those you can see we've had in the last 5 years. During the pandemic, everyone was staying at home. Demand for desks went through the roof. So there was a demand inflation. Suddenly, it was, if you could get your hands on one, it was a premium price because supply and demand. And then now we have the demand for higher wages because it costs more to live. And so we need to be paid more as a working force. And of course, the companies who have made massive amounts of profits for the last 50 plus years don't want to take a hit to their bottom line. So they're going to pass those costs on to the consumers, to the people that come to their businesses. Impact on the economy as a whole. Gradual or high inflation impacts the economy's stability. Central banks like the Federal Reserve try to manage inflation to ensure it stays in a reasonable range, usually 2 to 3% annually. Low to moderate inflation is typically seen as a sign of a growing economy, but high inflation can erode purchasing power and create uncertainty, making it harder for businesses to plan long term. Devaluation of currency. Over time, inflation decreases the real value of money. For example, $100 today might buy less than it did a few years ago due to the general rise in prices. A really cool tool that I use. Let me see if I can find it here. Inflation calculator. So if you Google inflation calculator, there's a lot of them out there. Let's see if this one's a good one. Okay, yeah, here's one. It's on the website data.bls.gov/CGI-bin/CPI calc.pl. Again, just search for inflation calculator. It's really interesting to see these things. So one thing you might have heard, from your grandparents. One of my grandmothers, was really proud to work for JCPenney back in her college years and whatnot. So that's probably right around, let's see. She's born in 30. Let's do 32. So let's just say 1950 is when she's working for JCPenney. She said she made $6 an hour and put herself through school. And of course, $6 an hour sounds like, kids these days are making 15. I was making 6. I had half the money they do today, and I don't know what they're complaining about. Well, the reality of that is that $6 back in 1950 has the same buying power as $80.37 in August 2024. This isn't an apples to apples situation here, folks. We have to, stay away from the brain seizing up and being like, well, I made $6, so I don't know what you're complaining about. Like, if the generation that is in the trenches, trying to raise a family, trying to keep a roof over their head, if they're saying they're struggling at 6, 10, 20, $12 an hour, 15, we have to listen to them, because it's completely foolish to say, oh, well, the numeric value is double what the previous generation had, without even totally listening to the actual facts of they don't have as much buying power. So let me get back to this. Too many tangents here for you. Where was I? Diminishing the purchasing power of the money. Central banks. Okay, so price difference. Okay. So impact on the individuals. Decreased purchasing power As prices rise, individuals can buy less with the same amount of money. This disproportionately impacts people on fixed incomes or lower income households, as their wages may not keep pace with the inflation. Cost of living. The inflation increases the cost of essential items like food, housing, and healthcare, making it harder for individuals to save or invest. And long-term planning. Rising inflation creates uncertainty about the future expenses, which can discourage saving and affect investment decisions. If we don't save today, we have nothing to use tomorrow or grow for our future needs tomorrow. And the opposite is true when you hear a politician talk about cutting taxes. Basically, you should hear anything of, oh, I'm going to cut taxes, as basically you saying, you know what, Mr. Employer, I'll keep working for you. I don't want a pay raise. I don't want a wage increase. I'm happy with what I'm making today. Like, talk about selling yourself down the river. All right. And then, so let's get on to, so that was inflation. Let's now discuss price gouging. Price gouging refers to the unusually high or expensive pricing of goods and services during times of crisis, scarcity, or emergency, beyond what is considered fair or justified. This is often temporary and tied to specific events such as natural disasters, hurricanes, pandemics, or supply shortages. Again, I think that a lot of these companies have colluded with this notion of, oh, if we all charge the same price, we can say that's just the going rate of eggs or a gallon of gas. Yeah, they're in cahoots with each other to squeeze out as much profits from each neighborhood as they can. Impact on the economy as a whole, local or sectoral impact. Price gouging usually affects specific markets or regions rather than the entire economy. It doesn't result in widespread inflation, but can lead to localized price spikes in essential goods like gasoline, water, medical supplies. Short-term disruptions in areas where price gouging occurs. The excessive prices can create economic imbalances, reduce demand, and damage consumer trust in businesses or markets. This is why many governments regulate or penalize price gouging during emergencies. Again, we have 37 states that already have laws on their books against these things, yet they don't seem to be enforcing them. Impact on the individuals. Exploitation of necessity. During emergencies, individuals may be forced to pay excessively high prices for basic needs such as food, water, or medical supplies because they have no alternatives. Perception of unfairness. Price gouging is seen as taking advantage of consumers, especially those in vulnerable situations. It often leads to public outcry and legal actions against businesses that engage in it. Inequity. Low-income individuals or households are disproportionately harmed because they are least able to absorb or avoid the inflated prices during a crisis. Now let's look at a comparison of the impact. Economy-wide impact. Inflation is broad-based and long-term, affecting all sectors of the economy. Price gouging is narrow and short-term, often targeting specific goods and regions during emergencies. The individual impact. Inflation reduces purchasing power gradually over time, affecting savings and investment. Price gouging imposes sudden, often extreme financial burdens on individuals, especially during crisis when they are the most vulnerable. Now, let's go over the perceived reality. The perceived reality of inflation. When inflation is moderate, people might perceive it as a normal part of economic growth, though high inflation can lead to anxiety about the cost of living. Persistent inflation can also create a perception of economic instability or mismanagement by authorities. The perceived reality of price gouging. People view price gouging as unfair or exploitive, and it creates a sense of urgency and injustice. Even though it may be temporary, it often leaves lasting negative impressions of businesses or governments failing to protect consumers in times of need. In summary, inflation is a systematic economic phenomenon that occurs gradually and impacts the entire economy. While price gouging is a more localized and temporary exploitation during emergencies. Both can erode trust and financial security, but their scope and causes are very different. So hopefully that helps you have a better understanding of price gouging versus inflation. Not everything is inflation and not everything is price gouging, but there's definitely a bit of both happening right now. And if you want to learn more, I encourage you to look it up. Google it. This isn't a one-stop shop. I'm not going to change your mind. I'm not here to tell you why things are or tell you what you should be seeing or believing or thinking. Think for yourself. Take the nugget that I have just handed you and look into it. Have these meaningful discussions with your friends and your family, your coworkers, your church group, wherever it's safe to do so. We can all take steps to reduce the insanity and stupidity in the world around us. Educate and be educated. All right. I don't know why I'm on a upkick of podcasts lately. This too shall pass, I'm sure. But there's a lot to talk about these days. So if I can plant a little seed in your mind, you go look it up, form your own thoughts, and vote accordingly. That's all I aim to do. So you have a fabulous one. I will be back very shortly, I'm sure. Until then, may your God bless.
Thank you for listening to Everything with Everett. Connect with Everett and other listeners on Facebook and Twitter at Everett Podcast. Everett would love to hear from you. Share your thoughts by emailing mystory@everettpodcast.com. You can also leave a voicemail or send a text message to 208-391-2808. Choose to listen, speak with kindness, and have a great day.